like this, we'll have our last question from Avi. I see is raising his hand, and maybe we'll give Shimon can give us his final statement or some sort of goodbye. So Avi, let's hear from you.
Thank you, Shimon. Thank you, Nadav. A little bit about me. I've been extensively going over the OSHA, UNRWA, and COGAT data sets. I've actually I've been screenshotting every update of COGAT to get the data set to work, to represent the data in graphs and various other data visualizations. A couple things in terms of debunking myths that you might have heard. So the 500 truck figure, as Shimon rightly pointed out, it's not just including 8 items, but it's actually worse than that. It's not just 8 items. It's also the fact that it's only working days. So even if you were talking about concrete that's going into terror tunnels and you include all of that, it still doesn't get to 500 aid trucks a day. What they do is they multiply that figure by a factor of 7/5 because they consider only 5 of them working days. And then so what they're doing is they're comparing working days pre-war to total days mid-war. So there's an inflation of the previous figure. The other thing they do is they include fuel, which I had to back calculate using the cross-checking the UNRWA database, and then they round up to one significant figure. You do all of those steps together, you get 500 trucks pre-war. It's not just that it's including things that are not aid. There's a whole bunch of steps that the UN figure had to do to get to 500. The other misleading figure you may have heard is the 150 food truck figure. That's also false. It's around 72, 75. The way they get to there is they include every little thing that could be included as food, even animal food, including even if pet food goes in. They include it as pet food, livestock itself, animal fodder. By the way, UNRWA database right now does not consider animal fodder to be a food item, but funnily enough, the UN considers animal food or feed to be a food item when they're using the 150 pre-war figure. And again, multiplying it by a factor of 7/5 as the working day inflation pre-war, but only doing total days. So there's a whole bunch of misinformation, and we can go over, I'd like to go over more, but anyway, so questions. A couple of questions. One question I have is, when you guys do your updates, when you list it as follows: you list the total amount of trucks inspected going to Gaza, and then sometimes you list, in addition, there are this amount of trucks that are coordinated to the north, and in addition, there are this amount of trucks that are going from the Jordan delivery channel, and you mentioned if they're food or not food or aid. First question is: does that number, does the first figure subsume the second figure? So, in other words, is that in addition, are these additional trucks in addition to what you've said in the first line where you say there's X amount of trucks that have been inspected and have gone into Gaza? Or are these part of the first figure? Are these not additional trucks, but trucks that have, in addition to what was mentioned, they go to the north? That is one. And then are you aware if these trucks ever, the additional trucks that you mentioned, the Jordan delivery channel, trucks coordinated to north from private sector, or trucks that go in directly to the north, are you aware of that ever showing up in the UNRWA database? To my knowledge, I'm not aware of it. Also, you may have, another thing that UNRWA is saying right now is that there's a difference between your figures and UNRWA's figures because you guys are loading half trucks or something, and then their truck figures are lower because you're only giving them half trucks, and then they're stocking up like 2 half trucks into 1 truck. Now, that looks silly on its face because I actually went into the UNRWA database, and if I look at flour, some of the trucks only contain 2 or 4 pallets of flour. And that was the entire truck. So that's ridiculous. But also the metrics that wouldn't even make sense in terms of the metric tons of trucks that are coming in on average. You'd have to bump the metric tons up to like 30 metric tons to explain any substantial amount of difference anyway. In any case, and my last question is can you guys please, one thing, I love the work you guys are doing, but can you please have a better way of having me compile the data other than screenshot your updates every day? Can you like have a database that like when the UNRWA system has is garbage as UNRWA is in many aspects? They do have something at least good going like that. Anyway, thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to try and answer all your questions. I'll start with the last one. In terms of the information and the data, where you can get it, either on our Twitter, but also if you go into our Twitter account, you will see a link to the website where we have the information on our website as well. So you can see that information there. In terms of the information that we release, there is the numbers of trucks that go into the Gaza Strip, and that is the numbers that we report. And then with the aid that is already within the Gaza Strip, there is the distribution of it to the north or wherever it is going. So those are those different numbers. In terms of the differences between us and UNRWA, and I'm glad you brought up those kind of two issues that have been coming up. One is in terms of half trucks, and the second in terms of the discrepancy in the numbers. So in terms of half trucks, it's just not true. There's no requirement on our end for there to be half trucks. It's just not true. In terms of the discrepancy between the numbers that you can find on our website or on the UN website, the numbers that we publish are the amount of trucks that we inspect and then deliver into the Gazan side of the border. That is when we have finished our inspection process, and it is on the Gazan side of the border waiting to be picked up and distributed by the international organizations. Our understanding is that the UN is counting how much they are picking up, not how much we have actually delivered into the Gazan side of the border, which means that with probably around 600 trucks worth of aid waiting on the Gazan side of Kerem Shalom right now, aren't counted by the UN because they haven't picked them up yet. And that just speaks to the problem that they have with distribution, and which we mentioned before. We are able to inspect a much larger amount of humanitarian aid than they are able to distribute. And that really is the biggest obstacle we see right now for humanitarian aid making its way to the people who need it. Nadav, do we have another question?
I think that's it for now. And Shimon, thank you for joining us. It was interesting for me. I hope it was interesting for the people listening to us. We're going to try and do this every few days, maybe a week or something. We'll see how everything happens. We'll have a different guest next week. I don't know yet who it's going to be, but we'll see. And you guys are invited to send us questions. You're invited to follow the IDF page, the COGAT page, and my personal page, and stay posted on everything happening with the IDF and COGAT in Israel. And thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.